That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him."
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, fellowship. It is really exciting to be with you guys. I just want to say, one, I don't know if I'm the only one, but I am really looking forward to getting a haircut. And that is not something I ever thought I would say because I have very short hair. But the other day, I hate to say this is how I knew I needed a haircut. I was walking both the dogs, my dog, my roommate's dog, one in my right hand, one in my left hand, and the wind was blowing, and my hair got to my forehead. And I don't like the feeling of hair on the forehead. It feels weird. And so I didn't have a hand to flip it over because I'm holding both the dogs. So I did something that I haven't done since I was in college. I did the Justin Bieber hair flip. I mean, I went straight sideways. And there were people in their front yard, and they started laughing. I acted like I didn't see them, but really I didn't. I walked really fast past them. But that's when I knew I needed a haircut, because I haven't done that since I had a man bun in college. And yes, I had a man bun. And no, thank God there's no photo documentation of that, or it would be up there on the screen wherever. And so I made sure all of Facebook and all my photos on my phone got rid of all of that evidence. But I am also excited to just dive into Scripture with you guys again. We're going to be, as you see, in Mark chapter 4 and verses 35 through 41. And what we're going to see today is the disciples went through a storm. And you see, they didn't just go through a storm. They went through a storm that really, they were led to that storm by Jesus. You see, at the beginning of verse 35, Jesus tells his disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." And I think a lot of us this morning will be able to and can relate with the disciples in this feeling of, you told us to get into the boat. And now we're going through this hard time. And it's the same thing with us. We're like, "God, I'm just trying to be faithful to you. I am faithfully walking with you. I'm doing the things that I need to do. I'm loving you. I'm loving people. And yet somehow, some way, I find myself in the middle of a storm." But what we're also going to see this morning is we're also going to see that this storm that the disciples went through had a purpose. And in the same way, that purpose that we're going to see with the disciples, for them going through that storm, is the same purpose for us. And so we see that storms have a purpose, and we're going to see three purposes that the storm had for the disciples in Mark 4, 35 through 41. And in the same way, the same purpose those storms in our life are for us. And so the first thing we're going to see is that storms reveal whose strength we rely on. The second thing, storms are a gift, and I know that sounds crazy. Bear with me, don't stop watching. And the third one is storms reposition our fear. And the thing that we're going to see and that you can notice throughout this is all three of these purposes, all three of these really lessons that we learn through storms are not natural for us to go through, are not natural for us to feel. It's almost like we need storms to teach us these things. And it's like only the storm can teach us the things that the storms taught the disciples in Mark chapter 4. And so the first thing that we learn from storms is that storms reveal whose strength we rely on. Storms reveal whose strength we rely on. You see, we finished last week. Doug talked about some parables that Jesus gave to his disciples, but also people that were following him. And he was with the multitudes all day. And so Jesus, it says that he was exhausted. We see in the other gospels that he was extraordinarily tired. And so he gets into the boat and falls asleep. And really quickly we see in verse 37 that things start to take a little bit of a turn. This storm starts to come up. This storm starts to brew. And there's some contextual things that we need to see kind of before we even dive into the scripture. First thing is these people in this boat, a lot of them are fishermen. And you see, they're not just fishermen, they're trained professionals. You know, today you ask a kid, hey, what do you want to be when you get older? Little girl or little boy, and they'll tell you doctor or veterinarian or pastor. They say that, you need to start praying for them. But you didn't ask that question to little Jewish children back in Jesus' day. You said, okay, congratulations, your dad is a fisherman, so you're going to be a fisherman because your dad was a fisherman, your dad's dad was a fisherman, your dad's dad's dad was a fisherman. It's just something that you did. So not only are these people who are fishermen by trade, but they've probably been out on the water forever. For as long as they can remember, they've been on the boat with their dads, learning how to fish, learning how to steer through not just any old sea, but the very sea that they're on, the Sea of Galilee. And then there's some contextual things that we need to see about the Sea of Galilee. First thing is the Sea of Galilee is known for having weather changes very quickly. 1 minute, great weather, you're just tanning on the boat, getting some fish. Next minute, it's the worst storm you've ever gone through in your entire life, and that has to do with the temperature of the water and the terrain around the Sea of Galilee, the wind speed. There's just lots of scientific reasons before that, but even today, the Sea of Galilee is known to have very different bipolar weather changes. And not only are they crazy weather changes, but it's weather changes where the wind can gust up to 100 miles an hour on this sea, and there's not even a hurricane. It's just the wind gusts that happen through storms. And because of these wind gusts, huge waves would form. And not just huge waves. I didn't even know this was a thing, but I thought it was just in movies. But the Sea of Galilee is actually known to have whirlpools, like little vortexes that form. So these are trained professionals, which tells me that this isn't the first storm that these disciples like Peter, James, and John have ever seen. They've seen big waves. They've seen, it said in verse 37, that water was filling the boat. I guarantee you that's not the first time that water's ever filled their boat. It's not the first time that they've seen big waves or the wind has been howling. There's things that they know that they need to do because they've been here. They've done that. They're telling people, you go do this, you go do this. They're steering the ship away from the whirlpool if there is a whirlpool. This isn't their first time going through this. So instinctually, what they're thinking is, hey, like, I'm confident in this. I'm going to get myself out of this situation. And so Scripture doesn't say that. So the question is, how did we come to that conclusion? Well, there's a few things. One, again, they're trained fishermen. They're not looking at the storm and going, well, we're going to die. They're just saying, hey, like, we just do what we know to do. We've been in this situation before, and last time we did this. You know, the water came in, we got some buckets, and we got the water off. We survived last time. And that's what they're doing in this situation. They've been in a situation like this before. They've been in a storm like this before. So they're just doing everything that they did before to get them out of the situation. However, the thing that's different about this one is everything that they try, not working. And how many of us have ever been in that situation? We've been through storms. We've been through hard times, and this is what we did to control the situation. The word control, it's big for a lot of us. This is what we did to make ourselves feel better. This is what we did to help us cope. Now we're in the exact same kind of storm, so we do the exact same kind of things that we did to make ourselves feel better, to control, to cope, and we realize that those things that we did before aren't working now. And so we come to our conclusion and we start thinking to ourselves is, I can't do this. And so with these disciples, they're at that point. It gets to the point where all of their effort and all of their trying isn't good enough. And so they wake up Jesus. And so it's funny how they wake up Jesus. They don't wake up Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, we need some help. We need all hands on deck. The storm's getting a little crazy. Water's filling the boat. We need you. We need all 13 of us to be doing something. No, they don't do that. They don't ask for his help. They don't go over to him and ask him to take over. Like, hey, Jesus, we've seen you do some pretty incredible things with those little magical fingers of yours, how you've healed the blind and the lepers and all the crazy, awesome things that you've done. Do you think that you could use that power now because we need a little bit of help? No, they didn't do that either. They wake up Jesus and they say in verse 38, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? They jump to the conclusion, they throw out the accusation that, hey, Jesus, we've left everything for you. And you could not care less. You could not care any less because you're asleep. We are about to die and you don't care. Do you even see us? Do you even care? And how many of us have had that conversation with God? Maybe even recently, maybe even this morning as you're trying to get church together and your kids are driving you absolutely insane. God, do you even see me? Do you even care? And the disciples are doing this with him. Do you even care? And Jesus had a response. And that response wasn't, he didn't really say anything at first. He gets up. It doesn't say he has any response. He goes to the side of the boat. He says, peace be still to the wind and the waves. And it says that the wind and waves calmed down. And the words that they use in Greek, it's almost like the sea became like glass. Went from big waves to still. And he turns around and he looks at them and he says, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And this week, I read that in a different light. I read that in a different way. I think I've talked about this before. I have a very hard uphill battle in my relationship with Jesus, especially in the way that I view him, because I view Jesus as a coach. You know, because sports have always been a big part of my life, therefore coaches have been a big part of my life. But a lot of the conversations that I have with Jesus in my mind, or when I read Jesus say things in the Bible, it's almost like he's this coach saying, hey, if you can't perform, if you can't give it all, if you can't do the things that you need to do, then there's the bench. There are guys on this bench that want to get in and play, and if you can't do it, someone else can, which is why I have this performance anxiety when it comes to my relationship with Jesus. And so when I've read this passage in Mark chapter 4 and verse 40, why are you so afraid? It's almost like, why are you afraid? Like, what's the matter with you guys? Have you not seen what I can do? Like, what do you mean do I care? Of course I care. Have you still no faith? This sarcastic coach. But this week I read it in a different way. I didn't read it with anger. I didn't read it with frustration. I didn't even read it with confusion. I read it in a compassionate voice. For him to go, why are you afraid? Can you not see that I care so deeply for you? Hey, I've been here the whole time. And can you see that I'm not going anywhere? I see you. I see your pain. I see the situation you're going through, and yet I'm still here, and yet I still care. And this is something that the disciples didn't understand the significance of, because in verse 38 is the huge turning point in the entire scripture that we're looking at. The wind and the waves are howling and going crazy, and it says in verse 38, it starts with one of my favorite words in the Bible, but he was in the stern asleep on the cushion, but Jesus was in the boat with him. And I love buts in the Bible. And I know I've said that before, and it sounds like a really youthy thing to say. But one of my favorites is in Ephesians chapter 2. And the first 3 verses in Ephesians 2 talks about the fact that we were dead in our trespasses. We were following the prince of the power of the air. We were by nature children of wrath. And then verse 4 comes the biggest but, the most awesome but in the Bible. But God, being rich in mercy because of his great love for us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. For by grace you have been saved. And in the same way, there is that kind of button here. And if the disciples truly knew who was in the boat with them, they would not have feared. But what they did during the storm is they weren't looking at the right person. They weren't looking at the right thing. They were looking at the wind and the waves, and that caused them to fear, which caused them to direct their actions towards themselves, at their own strength, at their own power, as if they were going to be the ones that got themselves through this. But what they didn't understand is, but Jesus was in the boat with them. And in the same way, in our trials and the storms and the things that we go through in life, do we not realize the big shift that, but Jesus is in the boat with us? Some questions to consider. I'd really encourage you to pause. First one is, what have you focused, or what are you focusing on in the middle of the storm? The second question is, how can you remind yourself continually that Jesus is in the boat with you? So we see that storms reveal whose strength we rely on. And the second purpose for the storm we see in Mark chapter 4 is that storms are a gift. Storms are a gift. And I know that sounds weird. And of course, we're saying that on church on a stage. But bear with me for 1 second. And the thing we need to first understand about the gift is what the gift isn't. The first thing is that the gift isn't the calming of the storm. The gift isn't Jesus going to the side and saying, peace, be still. But instead, for the disciples, what the gift was the experience, where Jesus could prove himself to them. And most importantly, listen to this, where he could show them who he really is, which in turn grew their faith. And I think it's really easy to look at the disciples and go, how could you not have faith? Look at all of the things that you have seen. But the thing I think we don't understand is the disciples have seen Jesus' power in other people's lives. They've never actually personally experienced his power like others have. The disciples up to this point, at least it's not recorded in Mark or any of the other gospels before this, they've never been at a point where it's been, Jesus, if you don't show up, I can't. Because all the other people that came to Jesus, the lepers and the blind and the demon-possessed, they were between a rock and a hard place. They literally were at a breaking point in their lives where they said, Jesus, if you don't show up, then I will remain an outcast in society and I will remain in hopelessness. The disciples saw that in other people's lives. Now they're in a situation, it's a breaking point, and they're saying, Jesus, if you don't, then I can't. So we can look at the disciples and give them a really hard time, but what happened through this experience is not the fact that Jesus calmed the storm. It's that the Jesus that they've made him out to be is slowly fading into the background. And the Jesus who really is becoming more concrete in their minds. The Messiah that they thought he was really isn't. Now they're seeing who he really is. And that's the gift in the storm. You know, I've gone through that, because if we think that the gift is Jesus calming the storm, and does Jesus calm storms? Yes. Will he calm storms? Yes. Will he always calm storms? Not necessarily. And I've gone through that. And even the last few months, just asking God to calm storms in my life and not feeling like he's listening, not feeling like he cares, because I would ask him to calm it. The next morning I'd wake up, storm still there. The thing that I wanted, not there anymore. And it was hard, and it didn't make any sense to me, and it led to frustration, and I'm really stubborn. I've learned that about myself. I'm not proud about it, but that's what it is. And that gift of having that change took a lot longer than it needed to, but it reminded me this week of this time when I was on a plane. I travel home. My family lives in Tampa, and one of the experiences, we can call it an experience, that I remember most is when I was on a plane going home to Tampa, and we hit some really hard turbulence. And I'm not saying like, oh, a little bumpy, like, oh, it gives me a little bit of a weird feeling in my stomach. I'm saying like shaking violently, our wings flapping, like birds' wings flap. I don't think planes' wings do. And then after about 5 minutes of violent shaking and people kind of screaming a little bit, it was like, how do I explain it? Like an elevator being taken out from underneath my feet. The elevator floor just dropping. I mean, and we dropped for about 5 or 10 seconds, and we dropped about 5 or 10,000 feet, and people are screaming. And it was like a roller coaster, which is great. I love roller coasters, but I don't love roller coasters on planes. But the whole time I will say, I had peace. And I'm not going to say that I had peace because I'm going to get super biblical on you guys and say, to live is Christ, to die is gain is the thing that was on my mind. Actually, I will say that never came to my mind. But the reason I had peace was because of the guy sitting next to me. Because for about an hour before that, he didn't have headphones, I didn't have headphones. I like to talk, so we talked for about an hour. And learned that this guy was a pilot for the last few decades of his life, and he was traveling somewhere to whatever city we were going to so that he can train other pilots. And so as we're falling, feeling like we're plummeting to our death, and as everyone is screaming and praying to whatever God they believe in, I looked at this guy, and he never flinched. His legs were crossed, his reading glasses were on, and he was reading. Never even looked up. And so even though I felt fear, even though I felt like, man, this doesn't seem normal, he never budged. And I felt at peace because this man was sitting next to me. I knew who he was, and I trusted him because of that. And you see, in the same way, if the disciples really knew who Jesus was, then they wouldn't have let the wind and waves freak them out, and they would not have relied on their own strength. Instead, probably what they would have done is, even though they had a little bit of this fear, they would have gone to Jesus and been like, hey, Jesus, I know you're tired, but the guys sent me down here to wake you up because it's getting kind of bad out there. You need us to do anything? No? Okay, well, did you want to do anything? Because it's getting, no, you don't want to do anything? Oh, not right now? Okay. Are you sure? Because I think we're going to die, but also you're God, so you said we're going to go to the other side. So I'm guessing if you say we're going to go to the other side, then we're going to go to the other side. Oh, okay. Well, is there room for 2 in that blanket? Because I'm a little afraid, and maybe you and I can ride this out together. If they knew who was in the boat, then they wouldn't have feared. And what happened is that who Jesus was, who they thought he was, faded into the background. And through this experience, who he really is took center stage. Because we need the Jesus who was and is, not the Jesus we want him to be. If we truly believed in the concrete Jesus who really is, then we would know his power, we would know his control or sovereignty, and we would know the love that he has for us. And it would cast out all of our fear, and we would not fear the wrong things. Because we were made to fear. But we were not meant to fear the created things. In fact, we were created to fear our Creator, but because sin has distorted and sin has taken us out of the place where we are, then what happened is we started fearing created things like people and possessions and situations. And the thing we have to understand is the thing that we fear is the thing that we worship, and the thing that we worship is the thing we find our identity most in. And so what the storm does is not only gives us a gift, it not only shows whose strength we rely on, really whose strength we should rely on. The third and final thing that storms do is that storms reposition our fear. Storms reposition our fear. And I think when it comes to the fear of God, I know. I've been in ministry for 4.5 years, and this is one of those things that I really didn't feel like I had a good grasp on. Because when you ask someone, like someone says, well, you got to fear the Lord. You go, well, what does fear of the Lord mean? I feel like almost every time we go through this circular argument, it's like, well, it's like a reverent fear for God. Okay, I wanted to know what fear of God was. You just put an adjective in front of fear. Well, it's like a holy fear of God. Well, that's just another word for reverent. But we don't go through that conversation because we don't want to seem ignorant. So we're like, oh, yeah, like reverent fear of God. That makes sense. And then we just go on not really understanding it. At least that's how I feel like conversations have happened with me. But this week, out of nowhere, I didn't even try to look for this article. I saw a definition about the fear of God that completely blew all the other ones out of the water. And it was by a guy named John Piper. And John Piper described this fear of God. He gave an example of an explorer that was in the Arctic on top of a glacier. And he's on that glacier and he's exploring it, but this big storm comes. And the wind is howling, the snow is beating down, and he's actually going closer and closer to the edge of the glacier where if he fell off, he would die. And he starts to fear for his life, but right before he gets to the edge, he sees a cleft. He sees a little crevice in the glacier, and he crawls inside of it. And John Piper says this. This is in his book, The Pleasures of God. At first, there was the fear that this terrible storm and awesome terrain might claim your life, but then you found a refuge and gained the hope that you would be safe. But not everything in the feeling called fear vanished from your heart, only the life-threatening part. There remained the trembling, the awe, the wonder, the feeling that you would never want to tangle with such a storm or be the adversary of such power. The fear of God is what is left of the storm when you have a safe place to watch right in the middle of it. Oh, the thrill of being here in the center of the awful power of God, yet protected by God himself. And the thing we have to understand about fear is that the fear in the created, it leads to anxiety. Fear in the created leads to the desire to control. It leads us to not feeling safe. But the fear of God leads to peace, leads us to rest in his goodness, and ultimately leads us to worship him and him alone. It's weird, but the fear of God casts out the fear of the created. And that's exactly what happened in the disciples in the last verse in chapter 4, is they went from the fear of the storm, and in verse 41, and it says, and they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? The fear of God cast out their fear of the created. You see, what the disciples couldn't see in the eye of the storm is the same thing that we often miss. Though despair threatens to drown out our hope, the anchor that we need is with us. Jesus is that anchor. The word that spoke the wind, the waves, and the sea, and the world into existence is sitting right in the boat next to us. Verse 38, but Jesus was in the boat with them. Let's take it home. The thing that we can find rest in is that no matter what life brings our way, we have an anchor that will never move, an anchor that will never leave, an anchor that loves us but has the power to help. And just like the disciples being in the storm, the wind was howling, the waves were large, they were crashing in the boat, and the disciples thought that they were going to die. If they would have just known that the God of the universe was in the boat with them, just like that pilot with me on that plane, they would say, man, he is sleeping, he is with us, we are good. And it may not be what we want it to be, and he may not calm the storm, but he is here with us. Where we can find our rest is in the fact that no matter what life brings our way, death, breakups, loneliness, divorce, rejection, unmet expectations, diagnosis, lack of diagnosis, whatever it may be, he is in the boat with us. And the purpose of that storm and the things that we can learn is, one, we do not need to rest in our own strength because it will never work. We can rely on his strength because he is in the boat with us. The gift that we receive is that who we picture him to be and who we want him to be slowly fades into the background, and who he really is gets concreted into our minds. And then finally, what the storm teaches us is the storm repositions our fear. From fearing the created to fearing the creator and going back to the way that we were designed. And you know what? We can kick and scream and throw out accusation that he doesn't care and that he's left us behind, but it doesn't change the fact that he is there, that he cares, and he is lovingly in control. So what we're going to do now, I think the best possible way to end this sermon is we are going to sing Anchor of My Soul. So sing it out, close your eyes, do whatever you need to do, but just know he is Lord of the storm and he is with you all the way. Have a great week of worship fellowship.
I've been tossed by waves of failure, almost drowned by shame's deceit. But underneath the wild waters, you are a deep and solid peace. And I know the anchor of my soul, sure and steady, and he won't let go. I know the anchor of my soul. You're not afraid of what is broken. You've always seen me through. So when the future feels uncertain, I know I still belong to you. And I know the anchor of my soul, sure and steady, and he won't let go. I know the anchor of my soul. And I know the anchor of my soul, sure and steady, and he won't let go. No, I know the anchor of my soul. Should the waves carry me away, I won't be afraid. You will be my strength, and I can rest. Though the waters roar, knowing that the storm is what the anchor's for. Should the waves carry me away, I won't be afraid. You will be my strength, and I can rest. Though the waters roar, knowing that the storm is what the anchor's for. And I know the anchor of my soul, sure and steady, and he won't let go. I know the anchor of my soul. I know, and I know the anchor of my soul, sure and steady, and he won't let go. He'll never let go. I know the anchor of my soul. And I know the anchor of my soul. Yes, I do. Sure and steady, and he won't let go. I know the anchor of my